I always try to lead with kindness. What we looked for is how do we take the concern of AI introducing bias and use it to actually overcome human bias? The only thing that's worse than a bad process is an automated bad process. Anybody who gets to a CEO position has had a lot of help along the way.
Welcome back to CEO Behind the Scenes. I'm Lara Nassessian, and today we're talking about what it takes to bring advanced technology into one of the most resistant corners of business. Our guest is Joe Tyrrell, CEO of Optimal Blue. Joe has worked with some of the most innovative tech companies in the US. However, he chose to step into mortgages, a sector long known for paperwork and tradition. Under his leadership, Optimal Blue is proving that even the slowest moving industries can embrace AI and machine learning when it's designed the right way. Please enjoy. Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Laura. Really happy to be here.
What I would really love to start with is the fact that you were working for some of the most innovative tech companies in the US. What was the decision to then move into mortgages, one of the most slowest moving traditional corners of finance?
Well, it's really interesting because I started my career in mortgage technology back when it was very paper-centric. And if you think back in the US, in the 07-08 timeframe is when kind of the mortgage bubble burst. And as a result of it, all of this new regulation was introduced into the industry. And the challenge was the penalties or the repercussions of getting something wrong became very serious for lenders who had been traditionally making mortgages with a focus on minimizing friction in the process and trying to create a more efficient and faster process. Well, now all of a sudden, if you didn't cross every T 3 times and dot every I twice, there were some significant penalties that you were going to have to live with. And so that ushered in this new era of checkers, checking checkers, checking checkers. And so there was such an opportunity for technology to both bring confidence in the quality of the process, but also just more efficiency and a better process for the consumer. But to your point, it was really met with a lot of operational resistance because people were so concerned about, well, what if I get this wrong? And so I spent a good amount of time in mortgage technology. Ultimately, I got an opportunity to go and work and lead an organization that was focused on really being at the forefront of generative AI and machine learning all around the customer experience. And the clients that I was supporting were some of the most well-known kind of blue chip brands in the world. It was Meta, Apple, Mercedes-Benz, Marriott, Four Seasons, Walmart, Target, all of which were looking to embrace generative AI, but doing it through very use case specific ways. Because what they were looking for was an opportunity to generate significant efficiencies without jeopardizing creating a very personalized experience for their customers or guests or patients. And so when the opportunity came for me to be able to go back into the mortgage technology space, I was able to do it and look through a lens of how do we introduce the same sort of value in mortgage technology that I've just been doing for some of the biggest brands in the world? Take a very use case specific approach. That way we could deliver a high level of value, but introduce a very low level, or really the target was no level of risk to these customers who had really been learning lessons the hard way through overregulation and through penalties that they would have to live with.
It's so interesting. And I'm wondering, for an industry that is often stereotyped as paperwork and pen and ink, what really surprised you the most in terms of how people started to respond to this technology and AI? What was that initial response and what really surprised you the most?
It's interesting when you look, and I think this applies to most organizations that are looking to adopt innovation, is when you're having a conversation with an executive, with a decision maker, and you can highlight or articulate, or even better, you can prove quantitatively what the value is of leveraging that innovation, you get a lot of interest, you get a lot of support. But then when it comes time to actually implement the innovation, and change management is really where kind of the rubber hits the road, you often find you get a lot of operational opposition. And largely because the people who are responsible, several levels below the decision maker for running the processes, they know where their warts are. They know where their workarounds are. And they've become so comfortable figuring out how to, manage in the absence of technology or innovation, that you get a lot of resistance to change. And so one of the things that I found was really interesting is it's not so much the ability to articulate the value, but you've got to really build the confidence of the people at the operational level. They're going to be instituting and relying upon this innovation as an assistant to them doing their job, not as a replacement, and certainly not as another added level of process that they have to encounter.
One of the things that you just touched on was this importance of change management. And one of the key aspects and factors to really consider when it does come to change management is building that trust that AI is here to really support and not actually to take over their roles. How did you actually do that from a practical perspective? What was some of the communication and messaging that you felt was required in order to build up that trust and that conviction in what you were doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think we approach this from kind of a multi-pronged approach. The first one was, we have to realize that there is a spectrum of customers. I mean, even in the previous company that I was leading, you're talking about all sorts of different industries and verticals, yet the one thing that they all had in common was size. They were all some of the largest organizations in the world. When you're serving a very specific vertical, that spectrum changes from the different types of businesses that they're in to the different size of organizations. And so you're going to deal with very large organizations who ideally would love to have headless operations. So I set it, I forget it, it runs, and I generate all these incredible efficiencies. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you're going to have very small companies that are really afraid of technology. They know that they need to embrace it because otherwise they'll be at a competitive disadvantage, but they're going to do it not only cautiously, but very slowly, almost like they've got to prove to themselves. So when you deploy technology, especially generative AI or machine learning, you have to do it understanding the spectrum that you serve and giving people an opportunity to consume as much or as little of the automation and innovation as you're introducing. The second is you got to be really clear on what is it that you're introducing. When people hear generative AI, the first thing they think of, at least in the financial services industries, is unintended bias. When you have decisions, financial decisions that are being made, and you're using automation or technology to make those decisions, you've got to really ensure that you're not introducing any unintended bias into the process. And so one of the ways that we approached it is all of our AI is branded as assistance. It's not there to make the decision. It's there to surface the important information so that the decision can be made more easily and more correctly. And so when you introduce it that way and people understand it's there to help them to get to the really important data, then it changes the way that they view embracing it. One of the things that we say all the time is there's a lot of data out there that's interesting, but there is only a very small set of data that's really important to the decision that you need to make or the job you need to do. So we're using generative AI to surface the important data. That way, you're not being consuming all of this noise that doesn't actually help you get to the right decision. And then the last thing we did, and kind of the third prong to our approach, is we were very specific with what problem we were trying to solve. People hear that, we want to deploy generative AI. It sounds great. A lot of companies are talking about it. But when you actually ask them, what specific problem are you using the technology to solve, you hear words like gain efficiencies or create more transparency or accelerate innovation. None of that means anything. You have to be able to tell the client, here's the specific problem we're going to solve, and here's how you know we're solving it in a way that doesn't introduce anything unintended or unexpected.
I think that last piece is so key and so critical because a lot of the time, as you said, it sounds great to talk about increasing efficiencies and all of these types of things, but what does it actually mean? I'm curious to know, what was that process like in terms of getting to that level of being so prescriptive and clear about the actual problem that you were solving? Was there a thought process? Was there a series of discussions that was had to really uncover what that core mission and intention was?
Yeah, the first thing is you've got to realize, especially like for us, we're a B2B software platform, which means that even though we have incredible expertise in our vertical in the company, we're building software that we're not using. Our clients are using it, but we're not originating loans. We're not pricing loans. We're not locking loans. Like, we're not a financial institution. We're a technology company that supports financial institutions. So since we're not using our own software, it means we better be talking to the people who are and really understanding what are the problems that they have and determining where generative AI and machine learning would be really appropriate to assist them in doing their jobs. And again, thinking about how do we deliver and deploy technology across that spectrum where we are going to have people that are going to consume as much as we can produce, and we're going to have others that are going to go into it very cautiously. The next thing we did is we tested it. We tested and tested and tested. One thing that we focus on is to ensure that we never have what I like to call partial prompts. So you think about generative AI, it's all about the prompts that you're using to get to the question you're asking the technology. So think about the word partial for a second. That word has two different meanings. One of the meanings is it's kind of partial, meaning incomplete, not full, but partial. The other word is, or definition to partial, is bias, leaning towards having a bias. And so you have to really be thoughtful about the prompts that you're using, especially in an industry where the financial repercussions of getting something wrong isn't a bad survey from a customer. It's, real financial consequences. So we wanted to make sure that the prompts that we were using were complete and also that they couldn't be misinterpreted so that it would generate hallucinations in the AI. And so that takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of customers working side by side to ensure that the results that we're getting are not just consistent, but they're as expected. And so we took a very thoughtful approach, and we've been, doing generative AI within the platform for probably about 6 years. A lot of it has been just kind of behind the scenes, working with customers, perfecting it to ensure that the very specific use cases we're targeting, we actually can significantly improve the efficiency, but also make sure that we're significantly improving the effectiveness of the solution.
Absolutely. And one of the things that you touched on earlier was the fact that, a lot of your customers and just the population in general, there is a different risk appetite. There is a different level of openness and a level of adoption when it does come to AI and these types of technologies that you really are bringing forth into the mortgage industry, when you have a customer that perhaps has been a little bit more on the reluctant side and is saying, this feels like a black box, like, we're putting all this input in, I can't even see what's on the other side of this. How have you really led that piece and really helped to make somewhat the invisible, if you will, feel visible and also valuable to the client?
Yeah, and it's something we face literally every day because you're really bringing your clients along and kind of helping them gain confidence and comfort with the technology. In our case, it's pretty easy to do because we already have a lot of automation that's configurable within our platform. So you can start customers with basic heuristics, right? Kind of being able to write if this, then that sort of equations within the software where they can automate really basic functions. And you're building their confidence along the way. It's kind of the crawl, walk, run approach. So we have tons of capability where you can go in, you can control it, you can configure it, you can test it, you can get comfortable with it. Then from there, we can move them up kind of the automation spectrum to starting to allow process to run behind the scenes. We can automate back office functions that have no impact on decisions. So again, you're just building their confidence as we go. And then the third step, really starting to embrace generative AI, is again, pick those high value, low to no risk specific use cases and let them do it in lower environments so they can see in their test environments that they are getting the results that they would have expected. And then they can deploy each generative AI capability almost like it's an individual feature and builds their confidence incrementally. But what you see is that the more and more that they start using it, the more likely they are willing to not only embrace the next opportunity, but really what we look forward to is when they start asking us, well, can you do this? Or can you automate that? Or I think generative AI could help me in this area. And so that's when you really know you've got someone who's really ready to embrace the innovation and moves from kind of that laggard to more of a maven.
You really met your clients where they were at. And this is a really strong theme that I'm hearing from the conversation and the way that you're describing the technology that you've brought forward is you didn't just meet them where they're at from a communication standpoint, from a showcasing value standpoint, but then you actually went to the extent of designing products to meet them where they were at. Could you speak to how you developed those types of products and some of the thought process behind being able to meet your customers where they're at from a product perspective?
Yeah, I mean, start with the biggest issue in financial services industries, which is the consequences of getting something wrong. So if you think about what an originator in the mortgage technology vertical does is they sit across the table, whether it's on a technology call like what you and I are doing, or they're meeting at a Starbucks, or they're stopping by someone's house to ask them some questions to get a sense of what they're interested in and what their goal is that they're trying to accomplish. And what that originator does is they leverage their experience, their background. But anytime you leverage your background, you can't help but introduce human bias into the process. Because I might be sitting across the table from someone and I'm starting to think, well, I'm hearing what they're telling me they're looking for. They're telling me a little bit about their income and their employment. And it sounds a little bit like, my client 3 clients ago, and I ended up helping them by putting them in this type of a loan. And so that, no matter how slight, is human bias. And so what we looked for is how do we use AI and take the concern of AI introducing bias and use it to actually overcome human bias. So the way we did that is when a consumer applies for a loan, there are so many different programs that are available to them. I mean, literally, there is, in some cases, hundreds of different loan programs. There's a different program if you happen to be a teacher, because there's special programs for people that are teachers. There's special programs if you're a first responder. There's different types of programs if you're self-employed, because there's different requirements to qualify. So as an originator, what you tend to do is you hear from the consumer, you start thinking in your own human database of, well, where do I think this is going to land? And then once you start the process of trying to qualify someone for a loan, as soon as you get to a yes, as an originator, as a human being, you tend to stop. Because my job is to try to get them qualified for the loan so that they can get into their home. And so once I get to that yes, I stop. And again, that is, no matter how slight, introducing human bias. So what we did is we took generative AI and machine learning to look across every loan program that this borrower could possibly qualify for. And then we serve those up to the originator so that they're not just limited by their own experience, but now the generative AI is looking for everything that they might be able to qualify for. And it's also looking for the loans that they just missed out on, and informing or educating the originator that here are a few things that that consumer could do that would then give them these set of loans that would also be available to them. So we're actually going to clients who are worried about technology introducing bias, and we're showing them how the technology actually fights the bias that already exists in their organization they might just not even realize.
It's so powerful. I'm wondering, Joe, do you have a specific example of a client that came in that was perhaps a little reluctant and resistant to the change, and once they saw the impact, they really turned their perception around because they saw the power of what this technology was able to do for them?
Yeah, we've had actually many situations. One that I can share is about a very large bank who's a client of ours. Now, when you're a bank, you have different requirements for lending. There's something called the Community Reinvestment Act. And so if you happen to have branches in a specific location where you're taking deposits from your bank clients that live in that area, then when you're lending, you also have to make sure that a percentage of the loans that you are granting are to that community where you're taking deposits. And really the intent there is that you don't want to have banks that are taking money out of a community but not putting money back into a community. And so a challenge that a lender had was that they were constantly trying to ensure that they were able to meet their CRA requirements. And so the challenge was there just wasn't opportunity for them to easily identify when they had someone who might be eligible for a special CRA program. And this was a client who was very resistant to using technology because, again, for banks, the consequences can be very big if you get it wrong. And so as we showed them how technology, machine learning, using AI, using automation could actually surface to their originators when the person sitting across from them might be eligible for a special program, it really changed the way that they viewed it. It wasn't that technology was a risk. It was more that it was de-risking some of the challenges that they were already facing. But again, if you're not looking through the lens of how do I solve a very specific use case, and you just talk about where technology can improve things, you're going to continue to experience resistance, and you're really not helping your customers understand the opportunity technology can play in, again, delivering high value, and in this case, with no risk.
And it sounds like the communication has been a really important piece of this equation as well, because it's one thing to have these success stories about the value and the impact that this technology has been able to bring forth to clients. But then it's also been about communicating that, showcasing perhaps those client wins. I was wondering if you could speak to that piece and how you've really thought about communication of what you're doing and the results that you're bringing forth to your clients and to the mortgage industry more broadly.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that you have to understand as a technology provider is when you're introducing something new, even if it is going to deliver incredible efficiencies, it is change. And no matter what, companies, for whatever reason, are resistant to change, especially at the operational level. And so when you're talking to a company about change, the first thing that they're thinking about is the cost of change. And what happens if this doesn't work? And then I've got to change back, and then I'm incurring more cost. So a lot of companies would talk about things like generative AI or machine learning as cool and innovative. The customers that we serve don't really care about cool or innovative. They care about a better experience for the customers that they serve, and they care about creating efficiencies without sacrificing quality or accuracy, which means you've got to come in from the very beginning, understanding and being able to articulate the value that your client's going to receive from this technology. You also have to understand, both as the technology provider, but also as the customer, if you're going to make the commitment that you're going to embrace technology, you're kind of in it. Because not just technology, but very specifically AI is like a campfire. And we've already seen companies that come out just blazing with all these capabilities, but they don't continue to feed the AI with the data that's going to continue to make it relevant. And so they quickly die out. So when you're making a commitment to AI, you've got to be prepared to constantly feed the fire by providing more and more data. And again, not just data that's interesting, but data that's important to help improve the results that you're getting, to expand the capabilities. So we're very clear when we're having conversations with customers, like, here's the value that you're going to receive. There's going to be a change in your process. We're going to be with you every step of the way. So part of what we do is not just say, here's our technology, go figure it out. But because our company has so much expertise that's been sitting where our clients have sat, we know exactly the challenges that they're going to go through, the things that they're going to encounter as they go through the change management. So we help them with it. We actually have teams of folks who work side by side to show them the right way to introduce the technology, to help manage the change management. And then we're constantly reporting back to them on, we told you this is the value you should receive. Here is where you're at on your journey to receiving that value. Some get to it very quickly. Others are a little slower to get there. And then we highlight why, but we also share with them what other companies have done to achieve the level of value that they should be getting. We don't share any secret sauce. It's all aggregated and anonymized data, but it's helpful for them to see that their peers were on the same journey and ultimately got, or in some cases exceeded, the value targets that they originally had. But also just making sure that when they're ready to adopt technology, that they know that, we're going to continue to evolve it. It's going to continue to innovate. It's going to continue to add more value for them, and making sure they're really committed to wanting to leverage it.
And to executives that may be listening to this who are seeking to roll out more AI technology throughout their organization, whether it be for their customers or internally, what advice would you give to them?
First is, don't just apply technology to what you're currently doing. The saying that we have internally at Optimal Blue is, the only thing that's worse than a bad process is an automated bad process. And now with generative AI, the only thing that's worse than an automated bad process is an agentic bad process. So when you're going to adopt technology, use it as an opportunity to really see how you can reduce friction, improve workflows, maybe look a little bit outside of the box of what you've been historically doing. Don't just put automation on top of the current process that you're using, because chances are those processes have been around for a long time. Again, operationally, folks don't like to change. So let's use this as a catalyst to really look at the entire workflow operations and figure out how you can get the most value out of going through this change process that you are. The second is it's okay to slow down. It's okay to speed up. So the good news about when you're delivering technology on a spectrum, for some people, you're waiting for them to get comfortable with it. for most, you're waiting for them to grow into it. So we're going to always try to be ahead of where our customers' appetite is for technology. One, so they always have something else that they can adopt and consume, but also so that they can do it in a very incremental pace. So don't feel like you've got to do everything all at once. Really use this as an opportunity to redefine what sort of organization do you want to be, not just 6 months from now, but 6 years from now, because the technology is expanding and evolving at such a rapid pace. Don't worry about what it does today. Think about where you want to be and what you want it to do, and work with a partner who wants to take that perspective and see how they can incorporate it into their roadmap.
That is such great advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Joe, I would love to wrap up our conversation today with our traditional rapid fire questions that we ask all of our guests at the end of each episode. So the first question that I had for you is, what is one thing that you've changed your mind about recently and why?
The thing that comes to mind that I've changed my mind on wasn't really recently. It continues to happen on a regular basis, but it's really when you're in technology, you kind of look at problems of there's always got to be a balance between high tech and high touch. And especially when you're serving financial services clients from a B2B perspective, you've got to be mindful of that balance. I've tended to put a little bit more of an emphasis on the high tech, knowing that you always have to have some element of high touch. I think over time, what my mindset's really changed to understand that balance is completely situational. It depends upon so many different factors, not just kind of the vertical you support or the size of the organization, of the charter of the organization, but what's the experience that company has had? Have they had a bad experience in the past with technology? Who are the customers that they serve? I mean, we have financial institutions where their client base is all high net worth individuals. So their entire mindset is high touch. And so understanding that it's not really a one size fits all approach from how you deploy technology is something that we've really learned. And now it really drives everything that we do is understanding that balance is purely situational.
And the second question I have for you is, what is one thing that you not changed your mind about, a belief that you'd want to share to help others to either lead or live better?
When I look back at the many people that have influenced my career, I've been lucky to have a lot of incredible mentors. And I think anybody who gets to a CEO position has had a lot of help along the way. But there is one leader that I've learned more from than anyone else. And this was the worst leader that I ever reported to. And I just remember all of the things that this individual did that just used to drive me crazy. And the way that this person would treat people, the way this person would, try to bully people, very tyrant mentality, wasn't really listening to feedback or to any ideas other than their own. And I learned so much on what I wanted to make sure that I never did when I got into an executive or leadership position. And so that's always stayed with me. And so my mantra is I always try to lead with kindness. Now, a lot of people will hear that and go, well, that's nice, touchy-feely, kind of Silicon Valley, fintech talk. But the reality is that you can absolutely hold people accountable and be kind at the same time. And so in my career, I've had to have many difficult conversations with folks. I've had to make big organizational changes when I've come in to take over an organization. But you can do all of those things and still be kind at the same time. And so I'm always cognizant of the fact that with your position comes a lot of responsibility to ensure that you're creating air in the room that you're in, whether it's a physical room or virtual room, and that you're making sure that people understand that you care not just about the job that they do, but how they're doing. And so that's something that's always stuck with me, and a very important lesson I learned very early on.
That is such a fantastic response. And I think sometimes we learn through the validating experiences of what we really enjoy and what we like. And a lot of the times we learn through contrast. And I love that you took that contrasting experience and it really shaped the way that you lead today. So thank you so much for sharing that, Joe. And thank you so much for such an insightful conversation. The work that you're doing in this space and the way that you have really brought advanced technology to such a traditionally slow-moving corner of finance has been so insightful and inspiring. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you so much, Laura, for having me. I really appreciate it.
And thank you so much to our audience for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, then please be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show. And also share this episode with someone in your network who you know would really value listening to Joe's expertise and insights that he shared with us today. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on CEO Behind the Scenes.